He's not wanting to hold still for me.
Don't you hate that?
All right, so we are going to begin.
Yeah,
Okay, so
you're on me.
Good job.
so if you'll recall, we finished Numbers last Wednesday.
Yeah.
So Numbers leads us to just beyond the Jordan, and then Deuteronomy begins, and the idea that we start out with is that in chapter 1 we start out with a discussion of the timetable and where they are in the time. So it says, these are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite of Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban and Hazareth, and Dizahab. I know. It is 11 days journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Okay, so it's on the eastern side of the Jordan, not terribly far from the Jordan River. Okay, in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the people of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him in commandment to them. Okay, after he had defeated Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. Okay, so then we get a little bit of a time period. It's near the end of the 40 years. It's right at the end of the 40-year wandering. Okay, they have already defeated Sihon and Og, which were the two kings of the Philistines that lived on the eastern side of the Jordan. Okay, the two Amorite kings that lived on the eastern side of the Jordan. And they are right at the time for them to cross over the Jordan. Okay, so what this is this is a instance of Moses going back over everything that God has given them so far. So what he is doing is he is reestablishing the terms of the covenant to the people of Israel before they go into the land. He's refreshing. Okay. By the way, that is what the book means. That is what the name of the book means. So Deuteronomy means second law.
Oh, second law.
That's cool.
So that is what it is. It's the second giving of the law. Okay. And so what we're going to find as we go forward is, first, in the first 2 or 3 chapters, he's going to go back and he's going to remind them of everything that they've gone through and their unfaithfulness.
Well, I'm sure they were glad to be that.
Yeah.
But the idea is it is a reminder of all that God has done and all that they have done.
Oh, okay. All right.
So he goes on and he says, beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to explain this law, saying, the Lord our God said to us in Horeb, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Turn and take your journey and go to the hill country of the Amorites and to all their neighbors in the Arabah and the hill country and in the lowland and in the Negev and by the seacoast, to the land of the Canaanites and Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them and to their offspring after them. Okay, so the idea here is, remember that he starts the discussion as they are leaving the mountain that they had gotten the law at. Okay, so here's where I want you to head. Okay, and at that time, verse 9, because at that time I said to you, I'm not able to bear you by myself. Okay, so even at that time, I go, yeah, this is a little much for me. Okay, sorry, hold on. It never fails. Start Bible study in my notes starts tomorrow. Okay,
It does happen that way. It's so weird.
it is really,
We get your name together. Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. No. He's a baby. He likes to see
So,
stuff.
I'm-
Do you want me to take it? No, I'm good.
So Moses says, I'm not able to bear you by myself. The Lord your God has multiplied you, and behold, you are today as numerous as the stars of heaven. May the Lord, the God of your fathers, make you 1,000 times as many as you are, and bless you as he has promised you. Okay. How can I bear by myself the weight and burden of you and your strife? Okay. So even then, he's saying, this is too many people for me to deal with. Now,
He's saying that.
this is Moses.
Okay.
Okay. Now, remember that part of this discussion, though, is Moses reiterating what he said, but it does not give the whole story, because remember that what happened, his father-in-law showed up and said, yeah, you need to get some help.
White people. Yeah. I
Okay.
was gonna ask that
Uh-huh.
if that was originally his father-in-law's idea.
Yes, originally father-in-law's idea.
You can't do all this by yourself. You
Right.
need help.
So, verse 13, it says, choose for your tribes wise, understanding, and experienced men, and I will appoint them as your heads. Okay. So the idea here is, I can't do it all myself, so I want each of your tribes to come up with leaders for yourselves. Now, this may mean, and I want to be clear in the way I say this, it is possible that while some of this is the moment where it is his father-in-law's idea, the discussion there was standing in judgment.
Yeah.
So this may be another event where he's setting aside
Judges.
leaders.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but anyway, I will appoint them as your heads. I'll appoint them as your leaders. Okay. So understand what he's building is a hierarchy. God has put me in charge of everything. So for each of the tribes, we're going to pick one guy to be in charge of each tribe, and then it's going to filter down to the guy who is over these 50. Okay. And that's how it's phrased. It says, so they answer, the thing that you've spoken is good for us to do. Okay, so you agree this was a good idea. So I took the heads of your tribes, wise and experienced men, and set them as heads over you, commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, commanders of 50s, commanders of 10, and officers throughout your tribes. So in a way, some of this is also setting up the military. Okay, so you have Moses and really Joshua in charge. So Moses is the leader. Joshua is kind of the military ruler. He's the general. Okay. So, and maybe to use terms from our own culture, he's the supreme allied commander. Okay. And so the commanders of thousands would be like your generals, because they're over 1,000 men. And so you have a certain group, a certain number of these commanders of thousands. And then in each of those commanders of thousands, you have 10 subgroups that have a commander of 100. And then beneath that commander of 100, it's split into two. So in a way, what we're looking at really is what we would call a military division of authority. Right. And you see that all through, because even when you get into like Roman culture, a legate is what it was called, is the commander of a legion, which is 1,000 soldiers. Then you had a centurion, which was a commander of 100 soldiers. By the way, that's what that means. When you say centurion, a century is 100 years. A centurion is over 100 men.
Oh, makes sense.
And so and then see, so really what we're doing is he's building a setup where there is a hierarchy of authority, a chain of command.
Kind of teaching us the government and, like I said, our military.
But the idea is if you have a small problem, you go to one of these officers who's over 10 people and he makes the decision. If it's too big of a decision to him, then you go to the guy who's over 50. Too big a decision for him, you go to the guy who's over 100, all the way up until if you've got a major problem, then you may take it to Moses. But think of how much that would lighten his load. Okay. So he goes on, and I charged your judges at that time. Hear the case between your brothers and judge righteously between a man and his brother or the alien who is with him. You shall not be partial in judgment. You shall hear the small and great alike. They went in there. He just went in there.
Perfect. Thank you.
So do not be intimidated by anyone, for the judgment is from God. So the idea is not only don't be intimidated by anyone, but make sure you remember that you're judging on behalf of God. So make sure you take that seriously. And then it says, in the case that is too hard for you, if the case is too big of a deal and you can't, then move it up the chain to me. Okay. So, and I commanded you at that time all the things that you should do. Okay. So now verse 19 continues this discussion of history. Then we set out from Horeb, and we went through all the great and terrifying wilderness that you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, as the Lord our God commanded us. So what we know already is this, okay? They leave Mount Sinai and they take what is about a 2 to 3 week journey. It's maybe a month.
That's
Okay.
a long journey.
To get to the place where they are to enter the land. Okay. So they come to the land where God is giving them, and it says, see, the Lord has set the land before you. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Now here we get a little more information. Okay. Because it goes on and it says, but you said to me, okay, then all of you came near and said, let us send men before us that they may explore the land for us and bring us word again of the way by which we must go and the cities of which we shall come. Now in Exodus, and I want to make sure that I'm right that I say this, or in Numbers, I said that wrong. Let me double check to see how it's phrased in Numbers.
What verse are we on?
That is verse 22.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So it was.
I love to hear him talking. That's great.
It's already said, done.
I know.
That's what it sounds like.
Okay. So in Numbers chapter 13, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan. Okay. But here Moses says, but you came and asked me to have it. So the idea is they came and asked, and then God said, okay, yeah, do that. Okay.
Oh, yeah, because they wanted some on the opposite side or something.
Well, no, this is much earlier than that.
Oh,
He is recounting the story. So this is the story of the first time they tried to go in.
okay,
Okay.
gotcha.
So let us send men. The thing seemed good to me, and I took 12 men from you, one from each tribe. Okay, so one from each tribe. And they turned and went up into the hill country and came to the valley of Eshcol and spied it out. And they took in their hands some of the fruit of the land and brought it down to us and brought us word again, saying, it is a good land that the Lord our God is giving us. Okay, now there are details that Moses doesn't get into here. Okay, so what we know is they go out and they spy the land for 40 days. Okay, when they come back, they've brought produce, they've brought all kinds of stuff. In fact, it tells that they bring back a cluster of grapes so big they had to carry it on a pole between two men.
I could just picture that too. Like this huge big grapes.
Okay.
That would be awesome.
Now, they say it is a good land the Lord our God is giving us. They do say that.
Yes, they do.
But then they go on, except for two of them, to say, but the guys in there are huge and their cities are fortified and they're.
Nobody asked for all the extra. Yes.
Okay. So, verse 26 then goes straight to the people's response. Yet you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. And you murmured in your tents and said, because the Lord hated us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to give us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us. Where are we going up? Our brothers have made our hearts melt, saying, and then we get into the statement, the other half of this. The people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And besides, we've seen the sons of the Anakim there. Now, the sons of the Anakim are a group of giants.
But the Amorites are not. There's a difference.
So, the Amorites are the people of the land.
Right.
But what they're saying is that they have seen some of these people of the land that are giants.
Right.
They are part of the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Hivites, and all of that. But they are huge.
I got a question.
Okay.
Probably way off. But I heard somewhere that the giants of old were Nephilim.
Okay. So
is that true?
There is a place in Genesis right before the flood
that talks about the Nephilim.
That talks about the Nephilim, and it says that they were the great heroes of old. Okay. It is, the Bible does not give us a clear picture of what all that is. Okay. Could they be descendants of that? Yes, but you're talking about nearly 1,000 years later.
Okay.
Okay.
So the Nephilim were really way, way, way back.
The Nephilim, the discussion of the Nephilim is a major part of the discussion that leads to the flood.
Oh, okay. So it was that far back.
It's that far back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, what we
so
don't.
It wouldn't be the descendants.
So no.
Everybody.
So the idea here, though, is when it talks about these sons of Anakim, they are huge.
They're giants.
Okay. Think about Goliath.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do.
And remember that when we go forward to there, when we go forward into Samuel, which by the way is a couple hundred years after this. Okay. In fact, about 400 years after this. Okay, we're fast forwarding another 400 years.
Okay.
Maybe closer to 350, because we know that when Solomon builds the temple, there is a discussion that it has been 480 years since they left Egypt.
Okay.
So and I may be wrong in that. I think it says it that way. I would have to go back and look. But there is a dating of the building of the temple that the temple is dedicated 480 years after they're out of Egypt. And it's either out of Egypt or they enter the land, but I think it's out of Egypt. Okay. So then you have 40 years from Egypt to coming into the land. So about 440 years. David's reign was about 30 or so. So it would be about 400 years after
The entering the land.
after the entering of the land. Okay. The interesting point about that, and we're taking a small rabbit, is if you
Yeah, I'm
look
sorry.
at this, the building of the temple in the discussion of Samuel and Kings. Okay. So so Genesis through Deuteronomy, and then Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, that group of books. Okay. There is a belief among some that there is a possibility that there is a similar writer for all of that. I don't think that's the case. There is definitely a similar theme. Okay. And I would definitely tell you that 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings tell their history looking back at the law of Moses and how Israel has been disobedient to it. Okay. So the discussion becomes that 480,
Yeah.
we know when the temple was built. Okay. You go back 480 years and you have the Exodus. You go forward 480 years and you have the exile. So the dedication of the temple sits at the very center point of Jewish history for the land.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. Up to the temple, it's kind of up and down. After the temple, it's
Straight down.
it's down.
Straight down. Huh?
Okay.
Straight down off.
But the temple is the high point of the original kingdom of Israel. Okay.
Okay, I was just curious.
No, you're fine. So the Anakim are giants. We don't know exactly everything about that. Okay, but we know that is a part of this discussion. So Moses then answers, but then I said to you, do not be in dread or afraid of them. The Lord your God, who goes before you, will himself fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. Okay, so remember, and this is a major discussion within all of this. Okay, as we look at both the story in Numbers and the story here. What is the issue? Okay, God has done all these incredibly mighty things in Egypt to get them out of Egypt.
Yes. And provided for it the whole way.
He brings them forward to Mount Sinai. He spends 2 years revealing himself and giving his commands and his laws and all of that. They leave Sinai, they head to the land. They get to the land, and they have all of these people within the last 5 years, they have seen God do incredible, mighty, and yet they don't believe God can give them the land.
Yeah, that's what gets me. And you see all these things, yet they're doubting him.
And their response in Numbers includes, well, let's just go back to Egypt. Okay. So what are they doing? We would rather serve the Egyptian gods than we would serve our God.
I hate to say it, but I just had this like revelation, you know. It's I think like, well, I wouldn't doubt that, but I was just sitting there and it popped in. Yeah, but you doubt whether God's got you the rest of your life, and you still sometimes want to go back to that slave of alcohol every day instead of knowing that God wants you. So that's just
understand that is a major element within the story of man, is that we forget what God has done. And because we forget what God has done, we choose not to trust what God will do. Okay.
Yeah.
We've talked about that on Sunday mornings about a lot about remembering. Hey, remember that so much about the Bible talks about, hey, remember.
Remember.
Do you think I mean, like with me, I have a real hard time, trusting God as Father, because I didn't have a good example.
Me too.
And so I have a hard time, and I tend to start thinking of God as man instead
Right.
of God. And so therefore I don't trust man, so I'm not trusting God. I'm not leaning on him. I've caught myself doing that lots of times.
Well,
And that's basically what they're doing. They forget to turn to him.
and that is, but understand that that's part of this discussion, and it's a powerful part of this discussion.
Mhm.
Because there is a level where you almost have to come to the point and go, how much does he have to do to prove himself?
Yeah, you think you'd
So-
get tired of it.
You know, and
Yeah.
by the way, let's make sure we understand that statement that you just made. He does.
Yeah.
There does come a point where he gets tired of, and
To prove himself.
and so then what happens? Well, if you don't want to trust me to be there for you, then let me show you what it looks like if I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get to that point with God.
Mhm.
See, I really don't. Like, I don't want him to show me.
So there is a level of that discussion. Okay. But remember that, and you've both said it, we can't judge the children of Israel and go, oh, I wouldn't do that, because we do it all the time.
I totally do. I
Okay.
do more than I want to admit that I do.
Because how many times do we choose not to pray to God about things because one of two things, and this is often the discussion.
Answer ourselves instead of,
Oh,
or listening to him,
Uh-huh.
where he's told them out there, they didn't listen to him, and that's
Yeah,
when-
or I don't like
Just
your
tell me
answer, God,
something
so
and I
I'm
know
gonna do
he's
it my
telling me
own way.
We don't trust that he can,
Mhm. Mhm.
or we don't believe that he can, or we don't trust that he cares.
Yeah.
And it is a bit like the line from one of the DC movies. He goes, well, if God is all good, then he can't be all powerful. And if God is all powerful, it can't be all good, because look at all the stuff that's going on. Well, that's not really it's not a valid argument. God is completely good and he is completely powerful, but he's also allowed
Giving you a choice.
choice to reign.
Well, yeah.
Okay. He has done everything he can do to show them, and yet they reject his goodness and say, oh, I don't think God can protect us. All the things that the people are greater than, taller than we. Well, let's go back to that story of David and Goliath.
Mm-hmm. And David was just a kid.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
So if we were to go to 1 Samuel, in fact, let's go there. 1 Samuel chapter 15, I think. It may be earlier, but nope. 13.
First Samuel 13.
Darn, nope, I was wrong still. I'm trying to find the right one.
Oh.
Oh no, 16, because it's after the
16.
nope, I'm still off. 17. There we go.
Okay, 17.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't remember. I knew it was in that area, but okay. So we're not going to read all this, but I want to make sure you see how this works. Okay. So the Philistines gather for battle.
Yeah.
Okay. The Saul and his men camp on, and this is how this works. You have two hills and you have a valley in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how this is set up. The armies of Israel are set on this mountain. The armies of the Philistines are set on this mountain. And there's really kind of a joke about this in some places, but it really is probably part of how this works. That the normal way the battle would work is before you went down, you would yell at each other and yell taunts at each other to try to destroy the other's morale.
Yeah.
So each morning and each evening, Goliath would step out of the midst of the ranks of all the other Philistines,
All big and powerful.
9'9",
That's pretty good.
Okay.
Joe.
I'll give you the whole thing. And there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Okay. A cubit is about 18 inches.
9 feet 9 inches is what my.
Okay. A span is this.
Up your hand. Which I think is cool.
Okay. So really, when it says it this way, 6 cubits in a span, he was 6 of these and 1 of these. He is a big boy. Okay. You think Shaquille O'Neal's big. He has about 1.5 feet to 2 feet on him. Okay. He wore a helmet of bronze on his head and was armed with a coat of mail. Okay, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. A shekel is about 2.5 ounces. So it's 5,000 shekels. So it's heavy.
120.
Okay. And it's made of, and understand, it's made of bronze rings. Okay, it's a ring mail or a chain. Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be like a metal coat.
Yeah.
Okay. And it says bronze, and understand the thing that is important here is that for the children of Israel at this time, their weapons would have been made of bronze. Okay. Now the Philistines had some iron weapons, but the children of Israel would have had bronze weapons, which are okay, but they're nothing compared to iron. Okay. So he had bronze armor on his legs and a javelin of bronze swung between his shoulders. So a spear. Okay. Now, let me rephrase. That is not the spear. That's the javelin. Okay. So a javelin is like a spear, but it's shorter.
Okay.
Okay. So the first spear is a throwing spear, the javelin. The second spear would have been a footman's lance, is basically the idea. It would have been a big spear. You wouldn't have thrown it, you would have used it to attack. Okay.
Impale.
The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. So probably about that big around.
Wow.
Okay. And it had a 600 shekel spearhead on it. So the spearhead was several pounds. Had a shield bearer that went before him, which means he had a shield that he wasn't carrying right now. And he would stand up in front of the ranks of Israel, and this is how he would say, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? So why are you guys here? You guys have lined up over on that hill all nice and pretty. Why? I'm a Philistine. Why don't you come kill me?"
Yeah.
Aren't you the servants of Saul? So choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. So why don't you guys pick your best guy, and I'll represent the Philistines as their best guy, and we'll fight one-on-one, and we'll settle the battle.
Yeah. All in there singing. You might as well sit down and listen to some Bible study if you're not doing sport.
Okay, so here is part of the discussion. Okay, and it's a very, very, very important thing. Verse 11 says, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Okay, so this tells us something.
I would be too.
This tells us something we need to understand. They couldn't see past Goliath.
You would have thought they'd realized that he was one. Yeah.
Right.
But they must have thought the whole army was like.
Well, no. It was, the idea was he was challenging them for a one-on-one fight.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would.
But here's the major discussion though. Okay. Number one, if you were going to do the biggest guy versus the biggest guy, it should have been Saul coming down.
Yeah.
Because it says Saul was head and shoulders above, taller than everybody else in Israel. Okay.
Like the short people.
Uh-huh. But the idea here, and really a critical discussion in all of this, they're also not trusting God to give them victory.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, what has happened to Saul within a short period of time of this? Earlier, he'd been rejected by God. He's rejected as king.
Yeah. He ends
Okay.
up picking his, like, having David, the guy that's going to replace him, go against Goliath.
But understand, so Saul's already in trouble.
Yeah.
But nobody in Israel has enough faith to say, well, we can beat Goliath if God gives it to us. So then they introduce David. And we know that David is the youngest kid. His dad is old. He's probably a young teenager, maybe mid-teenager, somewhere like that. Okay. And all of his brothers, or most of his brothers, are out at the battle.
Yep.
Okay. So they're shaking in their boots in the camp. David has stayed home and is keeping his dad's sheep. So dad tells David, go and take food to your brothers. So understand that at this time, the army wasn't a professional army. It was a volunteer army. And you didn't. So the idea is that they didn't provide your rations. So dad is going, hey, take food to your brothers so that they can eat for the next few days. Your brother's provisions are probably low, so take this stuff. Also take some to the commander, so it's a little bit of a bribe. But
Yeah.
it's
So maybe I'm dying.
okay. Not a bribe, but still the idea is
King favor.
right.
Yeah. Be nice or whatever.
So it says Saul and all of his men were at the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. No, they weren't. They weren't fighting. They weren't fighting with the Philistines. They were
shaking in their boots.
Shaking. Okay. So, and by the way, as we know this is the fun part. Okay. So every day, by the way, this is absolutely how this is phrased. Every day, the people of Israel would get up, they'd put on all their armor, they'd get all their weapons together, and then they'd march out. And they'd march out and put themselves in a line in front of their camp area, ready for battle. Goliath would come out.
Talking smack. And they turn around quick.
No battle today. For, by the way, a month and a half almost.
Oh,
It took them not long.
For 40 days and nights, every morning and evening, Goliath would come out and do this again. Okay. So David shows up at camp. David happens to be in camp when Goliath comes out. Everybody is going and hiding around, and David is, and by the way, understand this is exactly how this is worded. Goliath is standing there, David is sitting there listening to Goliath while everyone else is hiding. And when Goliath finishes his spiel, David goes, well, who's this uncircumcised Philistine? And they're like, well, that's Goliath, and he's been a warrior since he was a kid, and then he's big and strong, and he's going to kill us. And David goes, well, what'll be given to the guy who killed him? What is the king promised to the man who kills him? And they go, well, Saul promised his daughter and freedom from income tax for the rest of your life.
Woo, no more taxes.
No more income tax for the rest of your life, and a few other things. And he goes, well, I'll go kill him. Well, his oldest brother overhears him say it and comes down and just dresses him down. Okay. Well, Saul hears about it. Okay. And he calls him in. And for the rest of the story, here is the difference. Saul and all the army see Goliath. David sees the guy behind Goliath.
Yeah.
Notice that if you go through and read this all the way through, you will find that David never addresses Goliath by his name. He never really addresses him in any way other than with disdain.
Yeah.
Okay, so watch. So we come through this and David uses this phrase, and once again, we've been talking about remembrance. Okay. Saul goes, oh no, you can't go against this Philistine because you're a kid and he's been a man of war from his youth. But David goes, well, I kept sheep from my father, and a lion or a bear would come and take a lamb, and I'd go and strike him and deliver it. And then if he rose against me, I caught him by the beard. So I want you to think about this. We're not talking about a mountain lion. We're talking about a lion.
Yep.
The lion comes and steals one of the sheep. Okay. And he goes and hits it with a stick so it lets the sheep go. It turns to him. He grabs it by the bottom lip and goes, whack. Or a bear.
Or a bear. That's a scary thought too.
Okay. And he says, your servant has struck down both lions and bears. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of these. So watch. He's just said in front of Saul, he just like a wild animal. I've handled plenty like him. For he has defied the armies of the living God. So why does he deserve to die? Because he's defied the armies of the living God.
And then David's book, that's enough.
The Lord who delivered me. So who delivered him? Who gave him the ability to kill the lion and the bear? God.
God.
He's remembering what God has done for him in the past. And so guess what? He'll do the same thing with this Philistine. So Saul goes, here, have this armor. And he puts him in all this heavy armor. And he's like, dude, I can't move.
Yeah. Like, imagine.
I'm sorry that it's one of those funny things, because in the VeggieTales version of all of this, Saul is an asparagus, so he's a big tall asparagus, and David is an asparagus too, but he's a baby asparagus. His name in the show is Junior Asparagus. And so he gives him his armor and he looks like a bullet swinging sword.
Cute though. I really wish.
Because none of them have hands. And that's always a joke too, is they don't have hands, but he's swinging a sword with no hands, but he looks like a bullet. And he goes, I can't do this. Okay. So, but he says, I can't go in these because I haven't learned to use them.
Yeah.
I haven't been trained. So David takes him off and he goes out and he grabs his staff, which is just a wooden stick.
Yeah.
And he goes out and he finds 5 smooth stones. Now I want to make sure that we get this clear. 5 smooth stones does not mean tiny little river pebbles. It means 5 smooth stones, maybe the size of baseballs.
Yeah. I would imagine.
Okay. So we have in some ways, because of what we call a slingshot and what a slingshot fires, we have gotten in our head what a sling does.
No, but back then it was just a pouch on the rope.
It was
right?
a pouch on a rope.
And they put big
Okay.
rocks in it.
And so there are 2 things that a sling does. Okay. And both of them it does very, very well. First, you can build centrifugal motion before you release it, which builds speed. The other thing is, and it's the same thing that in a war situation, it's really kind of cool. They had what they called a spear thrower. Okay. And it was a handheld thing. It was a stick and it went out. It had a handle. Okay. And it went out like this. And then the butt of the spear went in the end of the stick.
Okay.
And you would use it to throw the spear. Well, what does it do? It lengthens your arm,
Oh, so
which
you
gives
can
you
get
more power.
Yeah.
The sling does that as well. So in addition to the centrifugal motion of it, it lengthens the arm.
I got you.
Okay. We talk about, Nolan Ryan and stuff like that. A good slinger could throw a rock way faster than that.
Yeah.
It would have been like a bullet. Okay, so I do want to say the sling is not this little cheesy weapon that totally miracle that it killed Goliath. I mean, it was a lethal weapon.
Especially in the right hands. Somebody that doesn't use it.
Okay. By the way, there is a discussion later in the Old Testament about some men from the tribe of Benjamin who could knock out the eye of a bird at 100 yards with a sling.
That's
Okay.
pretty good.
So he was good at this. Okay. But it says he takes his sling, he gets the stones. There's always been this fun discussion of the 5 stones. In case you didn't know, Goliath had 4 brothers.
So that's the significance of the 5 stones.
Or we sometimes believe that some people believe that's the significance of the 5 stones, is that there were 4 brothers.
It just seemed like it has to have some meaning for him to put it in the Bible.
Right. Okay. So the Philistine comes forward, comes near David. They meet in the middle. His shield bearer's in front of him. The Philistine looks and sees David. He is in robes. He's not in armor. He's a young kid.
He probably laughs his butt off like, what are you?
And he says, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? So he has a staff in his hand. And he cursed David by his gods.
But that pissed him off.
So, but watch, it builds into what's going on. Goliath not only disdains David, but he disdains David's God.
Yeah.
And so in the name of Dagon and all of that, I curse you and I'm going to kill you and I'm going to, the birds are going to eat you and all of that. Okay. David says to him, yeah, you come at me with a sword and a spear and with a javelin, but I come against you in the name of my God, in the God of Israel. Okay. And today, now watch the boast here, whom you have defied. This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, that all may know that there is a God in Israel. Goliath is an afterthought in David's mind.
Yeah.
Why? Because David isn't focused on Goliath.
He's focused
He's
on God.
focused on God. So, and so it really is, in a way, the schoolyard thing. My daddy's bigger than your daddy.
Basically.
Okay. So understand the reason we kind of got into this is going back. The children of Israel, in the same way that they didn't recognize it here, they didn't recognize God as being bigger than this group of guys.
Yeah.
And so, we can't go in, they're big and huge. And so God goes, okay, if you're not going to trust me, then I'm going to give you a few more years.
Let you just wander around.
That's exactly what the discussion is. I have done everything that I can do to get you to believe me. And you have chosen not to believe me at the time that. And so guess what? Okay, you say you can't go in because they're too big. Okay, you won't.
Not for a lot. Not to all y'all are end of death. And your children
all of you who were old enough to go fight the war right now, you'll all be dead before they go in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it won't be till next day.
Except for the 2 that were like David.
Except for the 2 that, yep. The 2 that were like, dude, we got this. God's got us. He's not going to bring us here to drop us on our head.
So it is a critical element of this that understand that fear in both of these situations. Now, I'm not saying this is always the idea, but really, in a way, it is. Fear almost always comes from a lack of trust in God. Why were they afraid? They didn't trust God could give them the land. Why were the children of Israel afraid in David's day? Because they were looking at Goliath and they didn't believe that God would protect them. And when the one who comes who says, no, God is my fortress and my salvation and he will protect me, then there's no fear.
Yeah.
By the way, same thing comes in when we hear the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
Okay, in Daniel.
And they're the ones in the fire that didn't get burnt, right?
So what happens? Nebuchadnezzar wants them to bow down to an image of him, and they say, no, we can't do that because we trust God. And he goes, okay, let me tell you what I'm going to do. Either you bow down to me or I'm going to throw you in this furnace and I'm going to kill you. And they say, we are fully confident that our God can deliver us from that fiery furnace, but even if he chooses not to,
we still will not bow.
We're not going to bow. We'll be more than happy to die if that's what God wants us to do. It's the same discussion. Often our fear of circumstance comes from the fact that we don't trust God to protect us through it. And we all do it. But understand that particularly in this discussion of Deuteronomy, it is after all that God has done to establish. And finally, he goes, okay, if you are choosing absolutely not to trust me, then we'll go that way.
I understand, why he wouldn't let the people go, except for Caleb and
Joshua.
But why Moses? I mean, because Moses.
So Moses made another error.
He struck her off.
Okay, so later Moses and Aaron don't go in because of the waters of Meribah.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Okay. And really, here's the funny part. Moses and Aaron don't go in because Moses lost his temper.
Yeah. Yeah, but why Aaron?
Because Aaron was in the midst of that too.
Okay.
And it actually
comes tendency to forget about Aaron.
Right. So actually the real thing, the striking the rock is one thing, but it's also what Moses says as he strikes the rock. He goes, okay, we'll give you water.
Oh, yes.
He took credit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then by striking it,
he disobeyed.
Yeah.
Because he told him, speak to the rock. Okay.
Just talk to it.
And there is a level at which, and we need to realize that this is part of this too. Over and over again, Moses stood in between God and the people.
Yeah.
And kept God from destroying them.
Yeah.
When he made his error, nobody stood in the way.
Nobody.
Yeah.
That's true.
Nobody stood up for him.
Yeah.
So understand that is part of this discussion, that Moses sinned against God and did not glorify him whenever he struck the rock. And so God goes, well, you can't go in either.
Yeah.
Okay. He got to see it.
I get to see the land. And help divide it out for the people, and then he's gonna die.
Nope. All right, we're gonna stop right there. We will pick up there. I know that we kind of chased a rabbit, but I'm
sorry.
I'm gonna be completely honest. I am so excited I get a vacation weekend.
Is this your first vacation since being here?
No, not since being here. Since
Probably the pandemic.
probably